Okay, very good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back after lunch. And welcome to the final panel of this year's MEI conference. I'm just glad I'm moderating and not speaking, because the title of this panel is "What Lies Ahead." So it is indeed a tricky task to say the least. But nevertheless, I think for a question like that, what is useful is to get really the sort of sharpest thinkers that we can find to help guide us through the landscape as we think it will evolve. And in that regard, I'm very pleased that we've managed to actually do that, and we have three very distinguished speakers who will be sharing their thoughts on this very important topic. Yeah? So we have Dr. Assad Al-Shamlan from Saudi Arabia, where he's the director of the European Studies Center at the Prince Saud Institute for Diplomatic Studies. But quite obviously, his expertise is beyond European studies. Mr. Muhammad Baharun, Director General of the Dubai Public Policy Research Center, also very eminent thinker and scholar and practitioner who has much experience on the very tricky issues that beset the Middle East. Last but certainly not least, we'll have Mr. Shivshankar Menon, who is really one of the sharpest strategic thinkers in the Indo-Pacific region. Yeah. And he's now a visiting professor, but before that, he was a very eminent diplomat and foreign policy and national security official, as I'm sure all of you know. The details of their CVs are in the conference booklet, so please have a look at that. Now, how we will proceed is I will give each speaker 8 to 10 minutes just to share their thoughts on this topic about what lies ahead, the path ahead, and how we can chart this path. And then after that, we will have an open discussion with myself and then with the audience, both in person here and those of you online as well. Yeah. So I will just go down the table in that sequence, and we'll start with Dr. Assad. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Professor Joseph, and I'm really very grateful for the kind invitation. I'm very happy to be here. I'm very honored to be with my co-panelists. Our topic supposedly is the way ahead, and I was asked to identify the major trends as we move forward to major trends in the Middle East. Now, the difficulty I had is really with what to exclude, really. There too many things one has to exclude, so given the reasons of time, I probably will concentrate on 2 or 3 phenomena, which I think we should keep in mind as we look into the future. But I want to start first by I am speaking here in my personal capacity, of course, as an academic. And I want to start first with a methodological point, and which is this. I think is the realities of the Middle East are too complex and too contradictory, like many other areas in the world. But Middle East reality is too contradictory to be enveloped in one perspective, which will kind of, if you get hold of it, the whole region will become transparent to you. There is no, the reason for that is there isn't one causality, one chain of causality, which if we get a grasp of it, then the whole kind of different things will appear as a manifestation of that chain of causality. You know, there are different trends. Some of them are independent of each other. Others are related, and they impact, or as they say, over-determine, impact each other. and I will concentrate on perhaps what I see are more salient, and perhaps some of them are rather neglected by observers. The first one, I think, the first trend which we will see in the future is the increased disparity between the GCC countries on the one hand and the rest of the Arab world on the other hand. The gap today exists, and it's very easy to identify, but my hunch is that this will only grow in the future. And when I talk about the future, I am not a magician. I'm not talking about 100 years from now, etc. But the foreseeable future, this gap will only grow. And it is on the fields of economic, the new economy, in terms of also criteria by social cohesion, the capacity of the state, things like that. I think, for example, if we look at two phenomena which are many people correctly see as being determining a great deal of our future in the world, AI, for example, artificial intelligence and digital technology, we will see there is a huge gap between the GCC countries, particularly UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, but all of them, and the rest of the Arab world. That will grow. And I would say that also I anticipate, or maybe one can make now the rational argument that the GCC should really coalesce together into a one block, not a unified state, of course. The state in the Arab world has a firm existence, including the GCC, but I think we will see more and more, for other reasons that I will relate to, a more unified, but quotation comma, GCC, certainly a more serious entity. And of course, as the whole world, given what is happening at the helm of international politics of great power competitions, we are moving more and more towards regionalization, and I think there will be regionalization, not in terms of the Middle East, but I think in terms of the GCC countries. There is a lot to be talk about that, and I'm happy to talk about it here or after the conference. The second phenomena, the second trend, which we have to keep in mind, with really serious consequences, is the rise of the phenomena of failed or weak states in the region outside the GCC. If you are in Saudi Arabia and you look around, you will see Iraq, you will see Syria, you will see Sudan, you see Lebanon, Libya, etc. Yemen, of course. They meet the definition of to a great extent of a failed state. And also you see with the others the definition of weak states. That is to say, they are under serious constraints. We are talking about Jordan, but let's say Egypt. I mean, it's not a situation that one would wish Egypt to be in, but it's in a sea, and we have to keep an eye on that. So we have this phenomena, and with that, of course, all sorts of results can ensue: radicalization, organized crime, migration. For example, today, in the area from Mosul, north of Iraq, to Libya, including Sudan, and if we include Sudan and Yemen, here is the largest concentration of displaced people on the planet. Now, this is a huge problem, and no one state will be able to address this. Now, who will address it? Of course, it has to be the region. At a time where, for example, the Europeans are people who usually can do something about it. Europe for years now, and now more and more under austerity. And when you have austerity, the first casualty is foreign aid, etc. And the US, you know all about what is happening regarding that. So we have a huge problem of refugees, displaced people, etc. And this is just one phenomena, one result of weak or failed states. The third thing, the third trend that I think we need to take into account is the effects of great power competitions on the region, particularly China and the US. Now, traditionally, let's talk about the GCC countries for a moment. The GCC countries have traditionally strong security, economic, etc. relationship with the United States, and they have built very important relationship, economic and technological, with China over the past 30 years. And there was no problem in that. Why? Because the US itself, Europe, they were also having a strong relationship with China. So there is no contradiction in this movement. Today, with the competition between the US and China turning into a confrontational competition, sorry, there is more strains about having, for those countries which try to have good relations with the US on, for example, security, etc., and good relations with China in the economic field, as in this area. The ASEAN countries have this, they feel that, of course. In the Gulf, it is increasingly felt, and it's increasingly felt in the field with the rise of the practice of securitization. That is to say, extending considerations of security to issues that by the United States and then by China, extending issues of security to areas where traditionally they were not part of security. So you have an expanded conception of national security in the United States, which included now things like artificial intelligence, advanced telecommunication, etc. And this will have the effect, already having the effect, but will have in the future the effect of impacting the mega projects that the countries in the region, the GCC countries, have put into things like artificial intelligence, transportation, etc., which as way of logistics, as way of moving towards the post-oil economy. So there are strategic stakes in this. The more, if there is competition between the US and China at a certain level, that's good, because you can have but once the confrontation reaches a certain level, then it will have the bad effects or the adverse effects in terms of securitization. You don't have access anymore as easily as before to certain technologies in the US or alternatively China. And also there will be a more fierce confrontation over international organizations, etc. But it's in our interest to have a strong international organization. And if you have a strong competition, that will also lead to some kind of international recession, which will lead to less demand on energy, etc. So after a certain level of competition between China and the US, a confrontation between the two of them will have a diverse effect, and the trend, as we can see in the world, is towards more competition, which will reflect itself in this trend in the region. Finally, the Palestinian question, and I'll say it in two words. We talked about that. I think what we have to realize today that really the most important question today, Israel is going for greater Israel. That's a project. It's beyond Netanyahu. It's already baptized by the Knesset, and it has been a long dream. And they think this is the moment. If they don't do it now, then when? If not by us, the right wing, then by whom? So this is the moment. Now, Israel, I think, in the end, probably it will fail. But until then, it will drag itself. There will be a huge amount of suffering on the Palestinians, equal or maybe more than what we saw, which is horrendous already. But it will lose, of course, reputation, but it will drag with it down its main supporters, the United States and some of the European countries, which is not good for us, because the diplomatic depth for our part of the region is with the United States and is with Europe. So I don't say that in any sense of celebration or anything of this sort. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Assad, for sketching out some of these broad trends that really will be shaping the dynamics of the region in the coming months, even years. Mr. Muhammad Baharun, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, and thank you for staying with us. I would like, of course, to thank MEI, Michelle, Dr. Liao, Shay, and all of the friends here for the chance to be here, but also the opportunity to use my fortune-telling skills, because what lies ahead is about fortune-telling. You were shy about it, I might not be shy. So the session is titled What Lies Ahead, so it needs a little bit fortune-telling. So I used to think that using this proverbial, crystal ball is a very easy exercise. You look down the road for 10, 15 years, who's going to live long enough to come and hold you accountable? But I'm afraid that nowadays, history is in a fast-forward mode. So what we talk about today could happen next month, in a couple of weeks, sometimes tomorrow, as it has happened with me before. So again, it's very difficult sometimes to say that, well, I think this would happen in the future. History will come and hunt you very, very soon, and particularly in our region. So again, fortune telling may be somewhat of a colorful skill, but exactly as indicated by Dr. Assad, it has certain trends underlying it. So allow me to talk about two geopolitical trends that I think is underlying this exercise. And these are two conflicting trends, and I would summarize them with two titles. One, the return of empires, and the second is the age of quantum politics. And of course, I'm sure you will pick up that there is a use of pop culture here. But, science fiction is always crystal ball gazing. So let's start with the easiest one, the return of empires. What does that mean? So we are looking at a rise of expansionist and revisionist powers. And that's the most obvious trend. At the beginning, we saw an inkling of this during the Arab Spring. We thought that the Turkish Empire or the Ottoman Empire was coming back in the way Turkey was addressing itself in the region. Also, when the annexation of Crimea, that was again underlying, there was a Tsarism, Russian Tsarism was coming back, and I think that's something we hear today. But today, it's very vivid in our region with exactly what was described as the vision for a greater Israel. So Israel's use of its military power is unprecedented in the region. And it's now possibly the only country who has launched military attacks against 5 other countries. And, maybe you'd say Gaza is not another country, but in the proverbial sense, it's part of the Palestinian state. Then there's Lebanon, there is Syria, there is Iran, and there is Sana'a. So these are 5. Some of them are something like 2,300 kilometers away from Israel. That's the attack on Mashhad airport during the 12th. So it's an extension of power. It's an extension of military power. I mean, use of non-state actors is known, but these are clandestine operations. These are unaccounted for. This is a straightforward attack all the way across 2,300 kilometers. So this capability, if you couple it with this actual occupation of land in Lebanon, occupation of land in Syria, and now this plan for reoccupation of Gaza and even the annexation of the West Bank. All of this together can open a Pandora's box in the region. And what does that mean when I say Pandora's box opening up? It's the type of reaction that you will get. So right now you can see this in the way Jordan is reacting. So Jordan has recently reactivated its conscription policy, something that it stopped in 1991, just during the time of the Madrid conference, as a way of building confidence when peace talks were starting. So they're telling Israel that they are not going to fight. We've stopped the conscription. Turkey's recent report coming out from their College of National Intelligence was titled Lessons from the 12 Days War. And the major lesson is that they need to worry about Israel more than anyone else. So this is a change of the way people are looking at it. But the problem is that empires are not only built on military power. They have to also be based on identity. Identity plays a role. And that's why this public endorsement by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to this idea of vision of greater Israel is creating a historical claim based on a Jewish identity. This is not about a country that is protecting its borders. This is something beyond this, far more sinister. And I think that's another problem. So that's why we cannot look at this current exercise of power at void without this identity idea. Now, contrarily, if this is happening at a time when the region, for instance, Saudi Arabia and other GCC countries have dropped the sectarial discourse in their policy. Nobody is talking about Shiism anymore. It's happening also when Iran itself has stopped the chance of death to America, damnation to the Jew, even at the height of the 12 Days War. We haven't heard Khamenei coming out and say, we'll obliterate Israel. Our attacks is supposed to drive the Israelis or the Jews. This didn't even happen. But on the contrary, we're hearing different type of discourse coming out of Israel. So again, the problem with empires is that they create the anti-empire. And usually it's the form of non-state actors. And this asymmetrical form of people who take matters into their own hand is quite dangerous. And unfortunately, we've heard today His Excellency the Minister talking about people being arrested here in Singapore because of fear of attacks against Israel. We've seen that in our region. And it happened even all the way in China. The first attack on an Israeli diplomat happened in China just after the Gaza war. Very recently in Washington, an Israeli diplomat was attacked. So these things are happening, and it will happen even more, because if governments are not doing anything, people will take things on their own hand. So away from all of this trend, the opposite trend. Completely different vein. It's something similar to quantum physics. Quantum physics found a new dynamics, a new ways of doing things. The things that we thought we cannot do with physics can happen in quantum physics. And I talk about quantum politics here. So this is a relationship between countries that is based on the physics of connectivity. It's not based on the physics of geopolitical affinity or, even identity or, competition between countries over. So there is no ideological polarity in that type of physics. And geopolitics takes a back seat. Geoeconomics comes to the driving seat. That's a different trend. And when the movement of goods, money, people, and knowledge are the driving forces, I think the geopolitical differences, including ideology, identity, and even political orientation, are not the decisive factors of that. Now, the drivers are economic corridors that transcends, the political differences. Drivers are CEPAs. That's the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreements that create economic partners between states that are policy-oriented but not politically motivated. So this is what we see in this corridor, what we call the Middle East corridor, like IMEC. the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor. This is what we see in something like the development road that goes from Iraq all the way to Europe via Turkey. These are transcontinental economic visions. That's what move these type of corridors. And they are replacing the trans-regional identities like Arabism or Islamism. These used to be identities that driven people to come and create blocks. These are not the identity that is creating the blocks today. It's something totally different. It's economic. And the economic corridors also in the region are changing the forms of relationship. So the one major thing that is happening is that it takes away this idea of friend and foe. This idea of putting people in these two different boxes. This is the box for the friends. This is the box of the foes. That's not also zero-sum calculus is not a calculus that is in this quantum politics of the region. It's not shaped by history. It's not shaped by civilizations. It's shared by shared national interests. So the nation state is the main thing, and we look at what are the shared interests between states, and then you formulate this. It has nothing to do whether I'm a Muslim or a Buddhist or a Christian or a Jew. It has nothing to do whether my ancestors had been in a war with you. It's shared about economic interests. So this type of calculus is even impacting national security matrices. So national security used to be about protecting your country from an adjacent country that could have some sort of... now we are looking at things like climate security, health security, energy security, food security. So these are the type of things that we're looking at. And we've seen the manifestation already in the region, in our relationship with Iraq, our relationship with Turkey, with Qatar, with Iran. This rapprochement has already had an impact in the region based on that calculus. Now, I'll move in very quickly to this idea that the name of the game in this calculus is apolarity. And apolarity has an impact on this idea of the global competition, or the power global power competition. I cannot be part of this team or that team. I will need to play with everyone. Now, just to very quickly answer the question is that, okay, what will happen based on these two trends? What do we see things? So we'll start with a very party favorite, which is a black swan. One black swan is a radioactive warfare. This is something that already could have happened. It didn't start only by the attack on an active nuclear warfare. It also appeared in the way that we've seen countries discussing using a tactical nuke. So nuclear weapons are not a last resort deterrence weapon. It's a tactical advantage today. So this is a black swan. But again, let me add another color, which is white. Let me talk about white elephants. And white elephants, because we cannot, we have to be inclusive. White elephants are big opportunities that we don't, it's so fantastical, it can pass by you and you will not notice it. And that is a world without enemies. In connectivity, you don't have polarity. That means you don't have enemies. You have interests. And that's a major thing that could have happened. It's actually happening in the region, but it can go by and we will not notice it. One final color, an orange phoenix. Phoenixes are the dead, cremated, and they come up from the ashes. What are those phoenixes that can come up? Jihadism. This is something that we can face very fast. Remember, jihadism appeared in Afghanistan. When USSR had, occupied Afghanistan, it was a big nuclear country that could do whatever it wants to do. No one country could counter it. Who came into the rescue? Jihadists. We have a similar situation today, and as I said, we've heard that. So now Israel is we've heard this phrase from Barbara, the Prometheus Unbound. I like to call it the Goliath. David is turning into a Goliath today. And that's a problem for us who are having a problem of what peace treaties with David, suddenly for David to turn into a Goliath. That's a problem for us. So to conclude that jihadism is not a vague concept. We're already seeing what al-Houthis are doing in the Red Sea. They're claiming the role of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. So that shofar of doomsday is already blowing up in Sada, and we could see far more than that. So whether this is black, white, or orange, whatever, most prophecies are actually self-fulfilled prophecies. These are the things that we do. We should be choosing which color we want to take. And I could answer later on a question, then how do we do that? Thank you.
Thank you so much for your reflections and the animal metaphors and colors, but certainly speaks to... No, it's okay, it's okay. We move on now to Mr. Menon. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you, MEI, for having me here. I'm not quite sure why, because I really don't know the region. I suppose, as they say, those who know don't talk, and those who talk don't know. I mean, so I'm in the second category. My problem when I looked at the title of what we're doing today, Reordering the Middle East, assumes A, there was an order, B, assumes we're going to an order. So I look back at all the predictions that people used to make about the Middle East. We have never, ever predicted what's going to happen in the Middle East. We've been consistently wrong. So what do you do in that situation? You can't extrapolate. Do you, look at a menagerie, color it differently? So I figured that I just mentioned the 5 things that I would look at, that what will I watch out for? And then maybe that will lead us into some idea of where we're going. I'm not really sure. For me, I think a lot of what I was going to say has been covered already. As we were told earlier, today there is no really there are capable but unwilling external security providers for the region today. I think you made the point earlier in the morning. The US has the capability, but I think it lacks the interest today. And as her dependence on external fossil fuels has gone down, she's an exporter of energy now. I think that's not going to change very fundamentally. So what happens? Clearly, the role of regional powers is going to increase tremendously in whatever emerges out of the Middle East, whether it's Israel or whether it's Iran, which we were reminded rightly is down but not out, but Turkey as well, and Saudi Arabia, if she chooses to exercise her power. She's changed her domestic course dramatically and very impressively in the last few years. And so why not make similar remarkable efforts abroad? And I think we're seeing the beginnings of that. So I think we're going to see a Middle East, I wouldn't call it an order, but a Middle East where the regional powers are going to have a much, much greater say. But for me, the key is going to lie in the domestic politics of the Middle East. And if you look at it, the political and social contract is being renegotiated across the region. There isn't a country where that isn't happening. It's happening in Turkey, it's happening in Egypt, most obviously, and we've seen it for several years. But you look at Iran, where it's not just the effects of the 12-day war. It's been a continuous process for some time. You look at Lebanon and Syria, again, you look at Israeli politics, which to my mind have evolved dramatically. I think we underestimate the degree of unity in the Israeli psyche in the response to the 7th of November Hamas attacks. And I think it's dangerous to do that. We can't make the old assumptions we did about divisions within Israel, about the strength of those who worked for peace, etc. So domestic politics for me is the second thing. The third, I think, is, the radioactive, your black swan. And Iran, of course, is the most obvious. But for me, the more important than just how will Iran react to the 12-day war and the attacks on the nuclear facilities, why was Iran so restrained for so long? For so many years before that? I mean, it's really quite remarkable, especially for someone who comes from South Asia, where we chose completely different paths and responded quite differently to similar kinds of threats. Not quite the external threats, but within the region itself. So the question now, of course, is, does the 12-day war provoke Israel Iran into moving from latency to at least a form of concealed deterrence, and using that threat to try and improve her position? Because there has been a drastic reduction in her position in the last few years. Because it takes three things to have a nuclear weapon program: material, nuclear material, the equipment, and the knowledge. And frankly, the 12-day war, the attacks, the bombing, etc., both by the US and Israel, haven't really affected any of these three fundamentally. Iran still has the material, the knowledge, certainly, and it's basically high school physics now, so it's not as though it's some big secret. And she has the equipment, she has the knowledge how to make it, and the capacity of making it. So she could do that move, but she hasn't so far. And this is why I say the domestic politics is very important. And part of it, to my mind, it's going to be stuck in part of the succession and the transition that we're seeing within Iran. And that's something that I would watch very carefully. The other thing is, and this is more fundamental, is really the balance of power in the region. Because every country in the region and every external power is a revisionist, doesn't like what the present state is and wants to invoke change. And that for me only means more instability, less order, less chance of a new order. Because you look at the overall context, is it possible to talk of reordering or a new order? I mean, I've been in this business for a long time. I'm an old man. And I've heard the new Middle East now over and over again, and it's never quite come. But is it possible to talk of reordering the Middle East when the world is disorderly? When frankly, I'm not sure and the world has really reverted to its historical state of not having a world order anymore. I'm not so sure. Today, we're in a situation where Israel's power is in our face. It's very evident. We've heard through the morning about all the changes that have come in the last few years, and the diminution of Iran and its proxies. But Israel's power is military, and that is fundamentally destructive power. Military power does not make a new order, and it certainly doesn't convey legitimacy, doesn't confer legitimacy or authority. An order demands much more than just military power and sheer power. So where do you look for the other elements of an order? Where do you look for the other elements of legitimacy and authority? And I don't see them. I just don't see them in the Middle East. And that's my problem with talking about reordering or talking about a new Middle East or at this moment. What is happening instead is, as I said, an increasing role for the regional powers, but also an increasing differentiation between those powers. I think you said quite rightly that the gap between the GCC powers and the rest of the region, or the other Arab states in the region, is growing considerably. And as you said, you can see this increasing problem. So for me, the last thing that I would watch, and we're used to thinking of the Middle East as somehow the object of other people's policies. But what about the effect of the Middle East elsewhere? Because the Middle East does have effects. What's happening in the Middle East does affect others. And In Southeast Asia, for instance, you heard this morning from the minister about the radicalization of populations abroad. For India, India, and for the rest of us in South Asia, the Middle East really matters. We have 8 million Indians living and working in the Middle East. It's a main source of energy. It's also our access to the world, to Central Asia, it's critical. IMEC, as you mentioned, has huge potential as far as India is concerned, and we will keep at it no matter what, whether there's an order or not in the Middle East. We will keep at it. And you can see the effect of what happens in the Middle East all the way across the Sahel into Africa, across the world. This is quite apart from whatever Europe sees in terms of migrations and so on. And I think it will also have effects on the rest of the world in terms of financial markets and arrangements as we go forward. And that's something we shouldn't underestimate. So I think we need to actually turn the gaze around and start worrying about what the Middle East is going to mean for the world order, rather than just seeing the Middle East as an object of other people's policies and what we do. So where does all this lead me, these scattered sort of elements of what we might watch? I don't think we should expect any external saviors or any, certainly in terms of security in the Middle East. In fact, that concern is going to stay with us in various forms for a long time to come. But in all other aspects, I think we're going to see an increasing role for other external powers and so on. Because, as I said, the Middle East is going to matter more and more for the rest of us, for our financial interests, for our energy interests, for the way in which our societies are ordered and the effects that it has. So today, for instance, who depends on the flow of oil through the Persian Gulf? India, China, Japan, Korea. These are the 4 biggest consumers. And we've had the luxury of the US Fifth Fleet doing our work for us for free, and we're not going to complain about that. But how long can we count on this? At some stage, we're going to have to do something. When you look at the financial resources and the way the GCC, for instance, has worked across the political spectrum with everyone, and at the new financial architecture that is emerging as a result of, well, you can only call it the Trump shock, the Middle East will matter to all of us. And the rest of us are going to have to work with them. So we will step in other forms. So as I said, apart from security, where I think each of us actually sees threats, because that's what security establishments are. They're paid to think bad thoughts and to act on them. But there is more to life than just that. And in every other aspect, I think the rest of us are going to have to get increasingly involved in the Middle East. And you're going to see much more activism. You heard it from the Chinese speaker in the last session, and you'll hear it across the board. But unfortunately, as far as I can see, the reordering is only leading to an extended period of flux. I'd watch out for the nuclear. And I think we have a common external interest in working with the regional powers in the Middle East, who I think ultimately will control the future of the Middle East right now. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Mr. Menon, for your thoughts. So we've heard from the 3 speakers. We would like now to move on to really have an open discussion and to take some of the questions that you might have as well. While you think about your questions and formulate it in your mind, maybe I can pose a few questions to each of our speakers to sort of draw you out on specific aspects of your presentation. For Dr. Assad, I just was wondering about your comment about the GCC, right, and that it is perhaps time for it to sort of stand up and play a greater role. What would you say are the incentives for the various members in it to do that, and whether those incentives can be reconciled, because they may have different interests. Right? For Mr. Mohammed, the two big trends you sort of laid out, in a sense, they are at odds with each other as well, right? Because one is about a return to empires, and really about a return to the good old familiar world of geopolitics, right? Which has actually been the trend, right, in humanity, not so much what we have the last 70, 80 years. But at the same time, you talked about the age of quantum politics, where there are all these other aspects to humanity now that constricts time and space. Yeah. So how do you sort of reconcile these two trends? Are they even reconcilable, both intellectually but also in terms of policy? Right. I mean, if you're a policymaker, you are confronted with great power rivalry on one hand, and then the sort of emergence of new technologies on the other, right? So balancing the two, and then maybe Shiv, for your presentation, the 5 points which I like very much. I wonder if I can ask you to dwell a little bit on regional leadership, right? Because I certainly agree with you that whatever solution, or maybe not even solution, but prospects for regional order in the Middle East, if anything, it has to come from the region itself. Then, of course, this raises this question of regional leadership, and whether there's scope for regional leadership, and connected to that legitimacy. Because I had in a visit earlier this year to Israel, I had opportunity to interact with a vast range of thinkers, and there was one perspective that really struck me, and that was that it is time for Israel to assert regional leadership. Given the circumstances, I thought it was a very interesting perspective to state confidently. You did mention that military power cannot build a new order. On the other hand, certainly if you look at the last 80 years, there's this notion that the post-Cold War US-led order was underwritten by the US military, right? So in that regard, in the case of the Middle East, is there any scope for regional leadership given the Israel's, Turkey's, Saudi's, Arabia's of the world?
Thank you very much indeed. I mean, this is a very important question, and I'll try to answer it. First of all, the incentive for integration. Let us remember that the GCC, Gulf Cooperation Council, the 6 countries, started from 1981, started from the premise, correct, that it is in their mutual interest, all of them, to integrate. So the idea that integration equals greater interest for each one of them is already established, given the existence of the organization. And they started with a very great ambitions, actually. If you look at the charter, it talks about, maybe in the end, even talking about unity. That was 1981. The thing is, over the years, many of the great ambitions were derailed. There were some achievements, no doubt about that, but given the goals, the performance is not as good as what the goals were set up to be. And for some time, it has been taken for granted that this is basically what the GCC can do at best, maybe one economic zone, etc., free trade, of course, coordination, security, etc. But I think we have reached now a point where we need to revisit the idea. And given the regional and international structural changes, first of all, let us start from one thing, one fundamental fact, is that for all the GCC countries to build a post-oil economy, which keeps a standard of living, a decent standard of living, this is an existential challenge. It's not just a challenge among challenges. And in this, whether they are small or big, they are all share the same challenge. Now, building that, there are many studies that show that today with regionalization, you are better off achieving your economic ends than doing it alone. So there is no time here, but there are good reliable studies shows that if you have a more robust integration of the GCC, the GDP of each of the GCC countries will rise between 2.9 to 3.9% for each one of them, then they stay. This is one thing. So the incentive is there. The problem is that one will say, okay, like with all the issues of regional integration, always is good. Why people don't do that? Well, because of a lack of trust. And let us face it, there is an element of a lack of trust within the GCC, but this has to be overcome. And I think there are already, and there will be serious efforts to overcome that, given that the situation, the context, the regional and the international, will push towards that. What the GCC, I talk about fundamental idea of the GCC as being post-oil economy is a shared goal, strategic, vital. People has to remember one thing about the GCC, which is deeply internalized within the political culture of each of the GCC countries when they look at each other. And the ruling families in the GCC, who are the fundamental players, is that there is a conviction that they only stand or fall together. That the idea that one of them will fall and the rest will survive is not something is something that's seen as being impossible. And that explains the thing in Kuwait, explains Bahrain, for example, 2011. So there is this conviction that they are, in the end, despite all the differences, they are one together. The regime in Iraq can fall, in Syria and Iran, but not one of the GCC countries. So there is this element of being indispensable to each other. The thing is that's changing now is the great power competition put the GCC at a very, very awkward position. The GCC, for all strategic reasons, aligned with the West. I mean, the indicators are too many to say. But with the competition with China, China projected as being the adversary of the US and the West in general, the GCC countries, none of them can read it the same way, cannot subscribe to this narrative. Yes, against the Soviet Union, fine, anti-communism. But with China, the GCC not only don't want to be enmity with China, actually prosperity in China is good for the GCC. It is the main source of importing energy, also technologies, etc., etc. So actually it's structurally at the opposite side of what the US and some European countries want. So in the end, so that's one thing. The other thing is, the question is how much you can trust US security guarantees. There is a deficit of trust with the US, yes, has been gravely deepened by the Trump administration, but has been there. And anyone who will look into the future and be serious about it, one cannot know what the US will do in 10 years from now. I'm not saying that the integration will happen today, but in 10 years from now, where the US will be, maybe it will go into an isolationist mode, whatever. I mean, all the signs say that no rational being can trust their fate to the US in 10 years, and then therefore there is a need for self-reliance, and self-reliance for the GCC has to be collective. It doesn't make sense for Bahrain or Qatar or to confront the outside world on their own resources. None of them, not even Saudi Arabia. So there is a necessity regarding that, and I would say that today. There is the good thing is that there is something to build on. The GCC was not all, there were accomplishments, but there has to be a leap, as Mao used to talk about, leap forward. Well, we need a leap of that sort in order that for rational reasons, not emotional reasons, but emotions also here help. Let us remember that in the GCC, and I'll finish with that, there is one phenomenon few people recognize, but it is there, which is over the years, over the past, even before the creation of the organization, actually the organization came as an embodiment to it, there rose an identity. We have different identities, by the way, not one. I am an Arab, a Muslim, a human being, etc., middle class. So we have different, it's not there arose something that didn't happen before, and that what they call the Gulfi identity, الشخصية الخليجية, الهوية الخليجية, the Gulf, meaning the GCC countries. Now, if you talk, this is very strange. You talk about someone in Jeddah, for example, in Saudi Arabia, or in Najd, for where I come from, the middle. This is strange for my father my father's generation, my grandfather, because we are away from the Gulf. But today it is taken for granted, or someone on the mountains of Oman to think about themselves as being Gulfi. But this has come through time. So even the emotional, if you like, the ideological, if you will, infrastructure is there. What is needed is a push, and I think the changing circumstances in the region, because the region is very threatening as well. I mean, we have Israel. You are absolutely correct in identifying that, and there is always Iran, and of course you have a failed state all around you. That will be a push. That will be a pull for the GCC to pull together. We need the political push from the inside, and I expect reason, rationality, if you like, self-interest, exactly. Countries will move in that direction. There will be 6 sovereign countries, but you will have a far more robust integration in that region.
Thank you very much. How do we reconcile the two? I mean, it's not the idea of reconciling two different worlds. There's a lot that is shared between the two. In both of them, we have at heart the nation state. So one of the things that we need to do is to reinvest in the nation state. I mean, Dr. Assad mentioned the weakening and the failure states. We need to stop this by strengthening them. So an investment in statehood is one of those things, because as I mentioned, the connectivity is based on the shared national interest. So I need a nation state with a stated interest, and then I need to see where are those interests are connected. This is not fantastical. I mean, if you look at someone like Abdullah Öcalan, who's been sitting in a prison for years, not changing his mind. His mind has been changed recently. And it's not because of geopolitical issues. It's because of geoeconomics issues. That's what's changing things. So things can actually change. The same thing with Saudi Arabia and Iran. Iran has changed not because it has changed its ideology. It changed because it started to look at economic factors that's impacting their own people. They have looked at the transformative experience in Saudi Arabia and said, why can't we do this? That's what their people require. So it's not, we need to bring down this idea that you can expand without any consequences. This is the big problem today. And we've heard this in the morning, and we've heard it again. The fact that the US is not doing anything about Israel, it's not because Israel is bad, or because this concept that unchecked power can go on forever, this is the danger. In any system, you need checks and balances. And now we don't have those checks. So in a world where unchecked, it's going to be problematic everywhere. And I think I might have heard something in what you've said, that this is going to drive others into thinking about deterrence. I think you might be right. I've heard it from an Iranian expert that the nuclear weapon used to be deterrence for Iran. Today it might be survival. That's a difficult situation to be in, because guess what? Some other people are going to think about it. Turkey might think about it. Egypt might think about it, and others. And what are we going to live in? A nuclear age? So.
You asked about legitimacy and dominance, and the idea that Israel could lead. And why did I say that military power is not enough, that it's destructive? You know, if you think of the US-led world order after World War II, and there have been really 2 US-led orders since then, the US hasn't fought a successful war since World War II, apart from Grenada and a couple. But it's built the world's most successful economy ever. And that's what the order was based on. And so if Israel wants to lead the region, it needs to integrate economically into the region. It's not leading the region in that sense. And that's why I say that military power is not, I mean, I don't want to go back to the, you know, Weber said what? Church, charisma, performance, right? I don't see anybody who in the region today who can provide all these things. If there is a truly non-ideological, apolitical, geo-economic power, the closest thing you can come to that today is really Saudi and the Gulf states. That's really where, so if there is one place where maybe you could see the beginnings of an attempt to help to build some kind of constructive order, I would look there rather than, but they'd have to learn to new habits of behavior because there's no experience of this. And I think what we're seeing is the groping towards it. You see many signs of this, but I'm really not sure. I know we're predicting the future, but this is one thing that I'd rather not.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to open it up to the floor. Any questions from the floor? Yes, so over there.
Hello. Hi, my name is Anish Mishra from the Conrad Adenauer Foundation. My question is to Mr. Shivshankar Menon. In September 2023, 1 month before the October 7 attack took place, India hosted the G20 summit. And during that session of the G20 summit, there was this proposal to build an India, Israel, Middle East, Europe economic corridor. And very unfortunately, after 1 month, we know what happened. So one of the reasons for that proposed economic corridor was also to counter China's Belt and Road initiative. So my question to you is that after October 7 and the recent tariffs on India, Trump has imposed 50% of tariffs in India, and we saw Prime Minister Modi's participation in the SCO and a slight improvement of bilateral relations between India and China. My question to you is, how has this changed India's West Asia strategy? I mean, you use the term Middle East in your presentation, but India doesn't think of the Middle East as Middle East because it's west of India, so it's West Asia for India. So how has this changed India's West Asia strategy? And in addition, my question to you is India still interested in countering China's Belt and Road Initiative? Thank you very much.
Simple answer, no. And I don't think we ever have been, and none of what we've done in West Asia has ever been, oh, because China's doing it, we have to do it or something. Honestly, I'm not sure I see the connection. IMEC is in India's interest. And it's in India's interest because of our reasons, not because China's doing Belt and Road or China's building infrastructure. If China's building connectivity, good, we'll use it with our partners, including China. I mean, China's our biggest trading partner. Despite all the trouble in our political relationship and the trouble on our border since 2020, trade has actually grown and the economic relationship has grown. So I don't think we need to make these political, in fact, exactly as you said earlier, we need to separate the economics and the geoeconomics and the connectivity from the political quarrels that we have. And I think we've been doing it actually in practice. When you look at the region and you look at India's West Asia policy, it's been pretty consistent. And that kind of connectivity that we've been building, the kinds of links we've been building, has been going on now for at least 2 decades, if not more. So I'd be a little careful about handing over the decision on what we do, what India does with West Asia to some other power, and making it conditional on how our relationship with China or with the US or with the EU or anybody else develops. We have our own interests and we'll follow them.
Yes, please.
Thank you very much. As a Chinese student studying in Qatar, it's a great pleasure to see our Ustadan Khalijian here. And because today we see, as I'm in Qatar, we witness like Qatar is very active in brokering negotiations between Western and Muslim countries, sometimes others, like for example, Hamas or Israel and Taliban before, even in Sudan. Then, as we are here in Singapore, so my question will be to Professor Liu. So, because in this panel, I saw that, okay, we may look at if we see Qatar is a small country, but it's very active in geopolitics and even this global politics. Then Singapore, as a very well-developed state, also is influential in this region. Then if we talk about the Middle East, then what can be, because I think in these mornings, the Mr. Minister mentioned Singapore will think it and see it in a very pragmatical way. Then what are the benefits of Singapore if we look at the Middle East? And if Singapore is going to get involved into Middle East issues, then what capitals it holds to make it to take into effect? This is my question. Thank you very much.
And it's to me. Okay, so let me just very quickly take a stab at it. First and foremost, as far as Singapore is concerned, because, and I think you and the audience know this very well, Singapore is a very open economy. And not only that, we're very dependent on global dynamics. Yeah, arguably more dependent than many other states. Yeah, so in that sense, we do have an interest in whatever is going, whatever is happening in the world is of some degree or other of interest for us. Yeah. Second is that flowing from my first observation, we have always wanted to, or we have always tried to be objective, but to provide the opportunities for any parties who are prepared to come and meet and discuss issues, even differences. Yeah, we've never shied away from that. Yeah, whether it's North Korea and the US, China, Taiwan, China, you name it, we've done it. Yeah. At minimum, we provide a venue. If we are so invited, we are happy to provide input as well. We are under no illusions that we can shape the trajectory of all these kinds of developments, but we are prepared to do our best to try to nudge things a bit here and there for our larger interests. Yeah. And I think in that regard, when it comes to the Middle East, and this will be my third point, we do have interests in the Middle East. Yeah, I think that's very clear. Whether it is in terms of growing economic links and commercial ties, whether it's in terms of the cultural links that we have with various countries in the region, religious links as well as one aspect of that. It's in the nature of Singapore and from our very much part of our history, right? Because again, how did we become this very open society? Because we have always been at the intersection of all these exchanges. The Middle East historically has been a very important part of how identities have evolved in Singapore, in Southeast Asia, not just in Singapore. Yeah, so on the basis of that historical legacy, we do see that we have an interest, and certainly that interest is expressed in our desire for there to be stability. Yeah, in the Middle East, and whatever little we can do to sort of again, like I said, nudge things towards that outcome, Singapore has demonstrated and will continue to demonstrate that we are prepared to do our part. Yeah, so that's my response to you. Next question, Michael. Yeah.
Thank you, Joe. Listening to this very interesting panel, and by the way, Shivshankar Menon, I congratulate you as being one person who doesn't know the Middle East, speaking very well on the Middle East. Thank you very much. You know, it strikes me that geographically the region may be shifting, the center of gravity may be shifting. I mean, traditionally, if you look at it from a European perspective, the coastal areas, you know, from Lebanon down through to the Suez Canal, was always a sort of center of trade. An interface, really, between East and West. But I wonder whether, with all this conflict, there is a risk, to the point that Mr. Menon made about you know, military power not being a determinant, that the center of gravity moves to the east, and that the Gulf and all the trade corridors that are being developed in the South Caucasus and sort of on the landmass between Asia and the coast of the Eastern Mediterranean, that the Levant becomes more of a sort of desert than it was before. You know, a field of conflict, of communities that are battling one another, that dislike one another, no stability, and the center of economic gravity moves to the east, and with the connections more to Asia. And so that, and as someone whose family is from the Levant, this is what concerns me a great deal, that this is a great part of the world that's being left behind by perpetual conflict. I wonder if anyone has any comment on that. Thank you.
I think it's open to anyone on the panel. So.
Well, thank you very much for the question. Actually, yes. I mean, if we look at the Middle East, we say the Middle East here, as we are in Singapore. Actually, it's to the west. It's not to the east. But it's a geopolitical, it's a strategic term that emerged in the early 20th century. And it, you know, for reasons for the British imperial strategy, it's to designate the area which is east of London, and in the middle between London and India, which is the jewel of the British crown. So that was you know, it's a geopolitical, geostrategic term. Now. Traditionally, this area, the center is the Levant, Egypt and the Levant. And the other is really marginalized. I mean, for example, I'll give you just one example. There is a book, a classic book, that every student of Middle Eastern politics has to read, whether undergraduate or certainly postgraduate, by an eminent intellectual historian, Albert Hourani of Oxford University. It's called Arabic Thought in the Liberal Age. And it starts from 1798 to 1939. 1798 is very important for the Middle East because that was the Napoleonic invasion of Egypt. So that's a new chapter. That's modernity, if you like, starting in the Middle East and end in 1939. If you read that book, which is, as I said, fundamental, you hardly you see any mention of the Gulf or Saudi Arabia or Yemen, etc. Very marginalized. Now, this is not because that great historian was ignorant or anything like that, but his book is addressed to a Western audience, and the dynamic and the heart of the region is in the Levant and Egypt, and so all the concentration is on the Egypt and the Levant. Now, this has started to change with oil gradually, and slowly the center of gravity, center of importance from an Western gaze, this is what I'm that's the important, has shifted from the Levant slowly to the Gulf. And then we have in 1980 the doctrine, the Carter doctrine, which he declared that the Gulf will be a vital interest. Now that was the first conceptualization of the Gulf as being of a vital importance to the West. And vital means, in this code, they are willing to fight to defend it. The highest application of that was the liberation of Kuwait. So there has been a movement of displacement of the center from Egypt and Levant to the Gulf. Today we can see it very clearly. It didn't start just today. We can see it very clearly, and that will accelerate, of course, with time. Now, I think the Levant, etc., will remain, because if you want to secure this area, to have a stability, you need to have some kind of stability in the surrounding areas. But with the phenomenon of failed states and even weak states, it's impossible. It's not, United States has had huge difficulties with Afghanistan and Iraq. The phenomenon of rebuilding a failed state is almost an impossible. It was proved to be an impossible task for a superpower. So how about if we are talking about middle size and small powers? So that's why I think things will get better, but for example, if you talk about Syria, yes, I am very optimistic and hopeful, but let's remember, Syria lost at least a generation of development. Now, this cannot be compensated for, just by donors kind of gathering together and giving money. It's building institutions. There's something very tricky. There are so many things about building them, not just money and political will, no matter how determined. There are other things going on. But yes, I agree with you. The center of gravity is moving in the same way that the geo-economic center of gravity in the world has moved from Europe to this part of the world. The center of gravity in the Middle East, in the Arab Middle East, have moved from the Levant and Egypt to the Gulf, with opportunities and constraints, of course.
Just to answer the same question, but from the prism of the quantum politics. See, the idea of gravity is geopolitics. Gravity means weight, means pull power, means economic, military. And I think what we're looking at is something different. It's the hub approach. That's the connectivity aspect. So it's access. The GCC now is allowing better access to world economy than the rest of the countries in the Middle East. And that's, I think, part of the thinking. The thinking in the GCC is that they want to become the switchboard of the global economy. Switchboard is not a destination itself. You don't call the switchboard because you want to talk to the operator. You call it because they connect you to someone else. And that's exactly what they're doing. In this concept, the most important part in that concept is the G77. It's not the G7. It's not the big and powerful. It's the small, the conglomerate of other countries. And I think this will bring us back to your earlier question, the global south. That is the value for the global south. And if I want to take it further to the question on IMEC, IMEC is, I mean, everyone looks at it and describe it differently, like the seven blind men describing the elephant. But at least for us, it was a way to bridge the global south with the global north to prevent polarity, because polarity does not work for us.
Thank you. Any further question? Yes. Maybe in the interest of time, there are two hands there. Let's take both the questions and then we'll come back to the panel.
Hi, thank you, Professor Lau. My name is Yu Hong. I'm from East Asian Institute. Actually, I have two questions. One is on the China's Belt and Road Initiative. We actually know all the GCC countries already signed up for China's Belt and Road Initiative. So first question is, what is your assessment on the effectiveness or some of the limitation on China's Belt and Road Initiative from the regional countries' perspective? Besides, the infrastructure and connectivity project, do you think any potential other area we can expanding this cooperation between China and the GCC countries? For example, like the clean tech or the digital economic field. So that's first questions. My second question is about China's engagement with the GCC countries. It's perceived to be economically driven and also the risk averse, right? So China want to pretend to be, as a balanced approach, pretend to be the partner, or at least this kind of so-called neutral position. Do you think this kind of approach, economically driven, but the risk averse, right? Rather without to entangle with the regional countries, regional conflict. Do you think this kind of approach is sustainable in the long term? Thank you so much.
Are those questions for specific?
Yeah, it's open questions.
Open questions.
Yeah, thank you.
So anyone can pick up on any aspect of it. Yes, please.
Thank you. I didn't mean for it, but I also have two questions. But my second one is a bit more lighthearted and fun, I hope. So the first one is actually building on Professor Joseph's question, right, on GCC incentives for countries to come together, unity. I think I just wanted to hear perspectives on two things. One is on what happened 2017, 2021, the Qatar blockade. And the second one is the Abraham Accords.
Sorry, what was the first one?
The Qatar blockade, 2017, 2021. And the second one is the Abraham Accords, because as of right now, only Emirates and Bahrain have normalized relations with Israel. Right? So I'm wondering, how are these two factors or incidents, in your perspective, will affect trajectory or impact GCC unity? Second question is on names and titles. I think we had this brief discussion on terms like West Asia, Middle East, how it comes about. I'm actually just curious for Dr. Assad and Mr. Mohammed, what do you think about the term West Asia, which I think is being increasingly used to refer to the Middle East in general? So just want to hear quick thoughts on or reactions to that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe we can go down the table from you, Chief, if you don't mind. You can start first, and just please feel free to address any of the questions that were raised.
Well, I can't answer about how the Gulf countries would assess the BRI and where it goes. But from an outsider point of view, and for somebody to whom the West Asia is very important, I think the more BRI adds to the connectivity and enables us all to participate in it, as long as it's open, commercially viable, makes sense, I think, we'd be happy. And we would encourage more of that kind of cooperation. I think the problem starts when there are BRI projects which don't make economic sense. And therefore you start wondering about the motives behind them and look for other things. And there are some projects like that as well. So depending on which lens you use, if you use the geopolitical lens and look at things as strategically motivated and driven, and that's the question that starts when things are no longer commercially viable or open and transparent and open to everybody, then I think that's where the problem starts. But ultimately, it's the agency of the countries of West Asia that's the issue here. And it's their choice. So I think they'd be in a better position to answer what you said.
Thank you very much. Again, on BRI, I think it's possibly the genesis of the connectivity agenda. It's one of those very big projects that came connecting everyone. It's also the self-reflection of China looking at this concept of power as being economic rather than military. We haven't seen China exercise military power across, but it exercised the economic power. So again, that's on the question on the Abrahamic Accords and how does it impact the GCC. We haven't seen a GCC country that threatens to leave the GCC because of the Abrahamic Accords. Actually, Saudi Arabia played an enabling role because it allowed airspace travel through its own airspace, even though it did not join. And even within the UAE, we've got emirates like Sharjah that does not allow selling land for Israelis. But that doesn't mean that they left the UAE. They didn't object to it. So there is a range in which people might like it, don't like it, but it didn't stop everything. So I think that's on West Asia, Middle East. It's like the Persian Gulf or the Arabian Gulf. It's the same body of water. Call it whatever you want.
Okay. Well, thank you for the question. I'll just try to, regarding the Qatar question, I mean, need more time to talk about all the surrounding circumstances of it. But let's start from now as we move into the future. We are post that crisis, definitely. I would say for Saudi Arabia, the relationship with Saudi Arabia, Qatar is not only good, it's excellent. And there are many indications for that. I want to say something about the Abrahamic Accords, which I think is really widely misunderstood. And I would like to take this opportunity to try to give my point of view for whatever it's worth. This is my own interpretation. Now, the Abrahamic Accords has nothing to do with enhancing peace. Nothing to do with that. The Abrahamic Accords, if you look at it, there are 3 parties to the Abrahamic Accords. Each has their own motivation for going into the Accords. You have the Arab states, not just the Gulf, Bahrain and UAE, but also other Sudan, etc. But you have the Arab states, and you have Israel, and you have the United States. Now, let's start. This is where I start with Israel. In Israel, the formula of the Abrahamic Accords actually started there in the mid-90s. In the mid-90s, the Likud party, led by then Netanyahu, they were objecting to the Oslo Accords. They were against the Oslo Accords between the PLO and Israel. Although, by the way, the Oslo Accord, has to be also clarified, has nothing to do with the creation of a Palestinian state. The Oslo Accord has this formula that the PLO will renounce terrorism, etc., in exchange that Israel will recognize the PLO as the legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. There was no talk of a Palestinian state. It was a leap of hope by the PLO leadership, thinking that if they go through that process, eventually they'll get a state. And of course, we know what happened. And anyway, Netanyahu, at that time, in the mid-90s, against the Oslo Accord, he said, no. Because the idea of peace always understood, until today by many countries, including, I think, yours, is that it is land for peace. There was land occupied by Israel in 1967. There are UN Security Council resolutions say that Israel should withdraw from that land because it was acquired by force. And the idea is that in exchange of that, you will have peace and normalization with the land for peace. Netanyahu said, no. We should forget about land for peace. We should talk about reciprocity. This is what he called it. Now, personally, I know reciprocity is a very fine Christian concept, but he meant it in a different way. He said, reciprocity, they give us peace, we give them peace. Forget about the land. Okay? At the beginning, even in Israel, that was an extreme position, and people thought that he's crazy for saying that. No one will accept it. Actually, with time, this formula gained ascendancy inside Israel. So the Abrahamic Accords, what does it say? It says peace for peace. I give you Bahrain peace, and you give me peace. Let's forget about Palestine, land, etc., etc. And the right in Israel takes this peace and go to the Israeli public and say, see, we are right. We told you. You thought we are crazy in the 90s. It is a reality. Peace for peace. There is no need for to compromise, give painful concessions, as they call them, on the land. So that's the way, that's the logic of it when it comes to Israel. It has nothing to do really with peace as we understand it. For the Arab countries, they made this calculation that they say, whether right or wrong, I don't know, I think it's exaggerated, but they say, okay, they are interested in the relationship with the United States, okay, for many, but they say in order to gain influence in the United States, leverage in the United States, there are specific people who have really a great leverage, and these are the pro-Israeli influences in the United States, in Congress and outside Congress. And these people, you can only get them to your side if you have peace, if you open with Israel. So the Abrahamic Accords is one way of trying to get leverage in Washington through attracting those pro-Israel forces in Washington itself. So you make peace with Israel in order to gain more weight inside in the United States. It has nothing to do with the idea of having a peace, let's say Palestinians and Israelis, which is the core matter. The third element is the Americans. Americans always see itself as, the idea of accomplishing peace in the Holy Land is something fundamental, has been fundamental since Carter at least. And this way, when you have this accords between Arabs and Israelis, you go to the American public and say, look, we are marching. This is one of the accomplishments we are doing, peace in the Middle East. Actually, it has nothing to do with the core question. And at that time, we are now at the post-Abrahamic Accords, I would argue. Why? Because at that time, really, it looked like the Palestinian question is marginal. Nobody cares about it. New generation, Arab generation don't care much about it. But with the Gaza thing, we have it regenerated. We have a whole new generation re-educated by the question of Palestine, what happened in 48 and 67, etc. So even now, the Abrahamic Accord, which was supposedly a smart move by some Arab countries, gaining leverage in Washington at the expense of the space of the Palestinian question, now it's become an embarrassment. I give you just one anecdote. I was going to Germany last year, and I asked my son, he's 15 years old, I said, what kind of a gift shall I give you? His name is Saleh, like your name. I said, Saleh, what name? He said, nothing. I said, oh, that's a new thing. Nothing? I said, why? Germany? He said, no. I said, why? He said, because they support Israel. That's a 15-year-old. He was 14 then, and he didn't know anything about politics. So we are beyond that. Now it's becoming an embarrassment, but it has nothing to do with actually it empowered the Israelis, because they say, okay, we can have peace with the Arab world, etc., without recognizing the Palestinians as a political community, giving them self-determination. We can have peace without that. Now we know that in the end it will be, in the end, when all we're dead, it will be impossible.
Thank you. This is one of those conferences where the final statement actually opens another discussion, which we wish we had another conference on, but we will have to leave that for now. We've run out of time, and it has indeed been a very long day. And thank you to the panelists for the three panelists for panel 3 for sharing their thoughts. I was asked to summarize the discussion. I think it's foolhardy for me to even try to do that. What I might do, what I will do is just reiterate, I think, from today's discussions, five big points, big questions that I think we need to think about when we try to digest all that we have heard today. And just for your food for thought. Yeah. The first is this question of order, right? Question of was there an order that we are now trying to sort of reorganize? Can there be one? And what will anchor that order in the Middle East? I think we started the day with that question posed by Minister, and earlier in the panel it was raised by Shivshankar Menon as well, and I thought it's very important. It's quite fundamental, right? When we think about what lies ahead for the Middle East. The second and a very big issue is the role of external powers, right? We've heard how the United States is probably the most consequential external power as far as the dynamics in the Middle East, but also quite limited in terms of its influence and the role that it can play. You know, and in fact, I would argue that they're more limited than a lot of people believe that they or think that they are. But nevertheless, the most consequential. We talked about China as well. The reluctant power, as tends to be the case with China's view of what's happening in the world and its role in terms of trying to shape these dynamics. And then we talked about Russia as being incapable, I suppose. That's my word, but in a sense, incapable of being able to drive anything as far as the Middle East is concerned. So the question really is whether it's a glass half empty or half full in the Middle East in relation to the role of external powers. Linked to that is a third point, which I think came across. Mohammed talked about it, Shivshankar talked about it, and alluded to it, is the security dilemma, right, with regards to nuclear capability. I mean, triggered by the earlier panel one discussions on Iran, obviously, but this question of the insecurity of Iran in relation to its nuclear capabilities and the insecurities that triggers in many other states in the region. Yeah? And linked to that, the question of the United States security umbrella, how reliable it is, and that sort of stuff. Questions that, mind you, are not unique to the Middle East, questions that we are thinking and talking about in our region. Indeed, that's something that we need to keep an eye on. The fourth point that I think is very important and didn't really get enough attention, I mean, we had a packed agenda, is regional integration, which all three panelists talked about, but it sort of is a theme that runs across the other panels as well, right? The question of economic integration, we heard earlier about how this notion of the redistribution of economic power from the West to the East passes the Middle East, right? I mean, semantics aside, yeah. But is it passing or is it bypassing the Middle East? And whether or not that particular region can think in terms of, as Shiv put it, new habits of behavior, right, in terms of regional integration that is non-ideological, and the notion of the GCC playing a role in that, the switchboard of the global economy, as Mohammed characterized it, is something that we should think about. And last but certainly not least is domestic politics. I think that came across very sharply in the first panel, whether it was Israel, Iran, or Syria. The imperative of domestic politics. All politics, after all, is local, as we are reminded over and over and over again, and that's very real. So where does the domestic calculus fit in terms of these dynamics? I think your presentation earlier about Israel, ultimately, yes, everyone can say or do all these things, but at the end of the day, the Israeli people, right? What is their view on this? Can they be persuaded? All that sort of stuff, right? So these are the 5 big takeaways, I think, and certainly for us in MEI, we are very grateful for all these insights. We will think through them in terms of crafting our own programs and interests over the next year or so, certainly with an eye to next year's conference, which I hope to see all of you in again. Thank you very much for coming for this year's iteration. And so now it just leaves me to invite you all to join me in thanking our panel, 3 panelists, but really thanking all the other panelists as well for all their insightful comments.